Adjunct Professor Moran, Macroeconomics 111. In this session, we're going to be reviewing how the government finances fiscal policy will impact its effectiveness. If you remember, we had a video, in a prior video, we discussed expansionary and contractionary policy meant to fight recessions and inflation. Expansionary, increase government spending, reduce taxes. But that will give us deficits. Government spending in excess of taxes gives us a deficit. In order to finance that shortfall, the government can either borrow money or print money, create new money. So the two choices: borrow money or create new money. Borrowing by the government is selling interest-bearing bonds. So the government can create bonds, sell them, and then people, investors, can buy those bonds, which is in effect loaning the government money. This, though, will lessen the beneficial impact of expansionary fiscal policy because of an unintended consequence. And that unintended consequence is crowding out. This is a very important criticism of Keynesian economics by people who wish to see the government do less interference in the market, as well as by economists who point out that you should not finance the debt this way. You should just create new money in a time of recession. So what is crowding out? The inappropriate way of paying for expansionary fiscal policy to fight a recession. Crowding out is the increased amount of borrowing by the government. It may cause interest rates to rise. This may lead to decreased investment by business spending and reduced consumption when consumers will buy fewer durable goods. Durable goods are interest rate sensitive because they are often expensive, like TVs, refrigerators, cars. It assumes no change in the supply of money. So, what happens is, if the government borrows the money, by selling bonds, then there is an increased demand for money. That causes interest rates to rise because of the increased demand for money. That will cause both consumption to fall and IG to fall. If you remember, IG, the graph for business spending on new capital goods, changes in inventory, and construction, is a negative relationship between business spending in dollars, interest rates as a percentage, and the demand for that money. So higher interest rates will cause IG to fall. So what's happening is the government's trying to fight a recession perhaps, and the government increases spending, CIGGXN, in order to cause an increase in aggregate demand. But this unintended consequence of rising interest rates may cause C and IG to fall, which is counterproductive. It's called crowding out because the government is getting larger and crowding out the private sector, C and IG. Unintended consequence of how they pay for expansionary fiscal policy by borrowing. Instead, the government should create new money. Now, some people would criticize this because it could lead to demand pull inflation. But this would be true if we already started when we're in the intermediate range. When we're in the horizontal range, which is when you should only be conducting expansionary fiscal policy, you would not experience any inflation as we move along the horizontal range because of the extensive amount of useful machinery that is not being used. They'll utilize the equally productive equipment. As you get closer to full employment, you'll experience some small amount of demand pull inflation, but that's acceptable as we approach full employment. Uses of a surplus. If we're trying to fight inflation, and return us to full employment by reducing aggregate demand to the left, then the government would want to decrease government spending from 100 to 90, or increase taxes, or some combination. That will lead to the government spending less than they're taking in tax revenue, which gives us a surplus. The surplus can either be used to pay down prior debts, or the government can impound the money, meaning lock it up, not release it back into circulation. If the government tries to pay down the debt while they're fighting inflation with the surplus that results from decreasing G and increasing T, then the way the government does this is by buying back bonds that it sold in previous periods. But by buying back the bonds, they will increase the supply of money, which will drive down interest rates. So, the government pays down debt, increases the supply of money. That will unintentionally cause a decrease in interest rates, which will then cause an increase in consumption and business spending. The decrease in interest rates will cause an increase in IG, and the decrease in interest rates will cause consumers to try to borrow more money for durable goods. Well, that will have a counterproductive impact and push aggregate demand back into in an inflationary area. So instead of paying down the debt during a period of inflation, the government should just impound the money, keep it, so there won't be this negative change in interest rates, which would be counterproductive to contractionary fiscal policy. Paying down the debt is a good goal, but it should be done when the economy is back at full employment equilibrium, not when the government is trying to push aggregate demand to the left to fight inflation. How the government pays for fiscal policy, expansion and contraction, will determine its effectiveness because of an unintended consequence it may have on interest rates.